Hey everyone, welcome to You Be the Judge. We're here every Wednesday from 6 to 7, and we are here to discuss information, conversations, and develop an action plan. Because ultimately what we hear is not often what we are able to do. I like to say thank you to my two lovely co-hosts. They're just so brilliant women. I'm glad just to be around them. Marilyn Pierre, who ran for Circuit Court Judge of Montgomery County, and Judge Claudia Barber, who is just a phenom when it comes to helping people and writing and NAACP action work. I just think I don't say enough about my co-hosts, about all the work that they do behind the scenes and in the community. So I like to say thank you, because not enough people do stuff, and then when they're doing stuff, we should acknowledge them. So I'd like to say thank you to both of them. And welcome to You Be the Judge.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Dyer. It is such a pleasure. I am so excited to talk about the topic we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I would like to talk about what I did 2 weekends ago. It was really, well, it wasn't really sad. It was kind of sad because our oldest one moved to Harlem, getting away from his mommy. Well, his dad is really wonderful. But anyway, what I really liked about it, though, is I was able to walk on the street that's a block away from him, where they have a marker that depicted Tito Puentes and some of what his accomplishments were, and Adam Clayton Powell, as well as, who was the other one? Langston Hughes. And then it just showed me that I was walking where great people have walked before. I was like, oh my gosh, Malcolm X walked these blocks, James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston. It was amazing that, just to think about some of the people who walked down these blocks. Harlem was just moving and bustling, and I had so much fun. It just filled me up with lots and lots of energy, which was really, really good, because I was not feeling that happy to leave without our oldest one there. It's hard to separate from them. I know that they have to leave you in order to be independent and all, and that's what you bring your children up to be, for them to actually be independent and live without you. But still, you on the one hand say, yes, but I want you to do that logically, but emotionally, no. But like I said, being in such a wonderful place made it easier. What about you, Judge Barber? What have you been up to?
Well, I've been keeping my eye on the Anne Arundel County election results, because that's been a nail biter particularly for the county executive race, and there were some other races that flipped, and it kind of goes back to that discussion that we had last week, that the mail-in ballots are really the ones that are bringing people over the top. And it shows that people who exercise their right to vote by mailing in their ballots, it's a big deal. And it is making a big difference in the numbers. Oh. And so never underestimate your vote and think.
Okay, here we go.
Hey everyone, welcome to You Be the Judge. We're here every Wednesday from 6 to 7, and we are here to discuss information, conversations, and develop an action plan. Because ultimately what we hear is not often what we are able to do. I like to say thank you to my two lovely co-hosts. They're just so brilliant women. I'm glad just to be around them. Marilyn Pierre, who ran for Circuit Court Judge of Montgomery County, and Judge Claudia Barber, who is just a phenom when it comes to helping people and writing and NAACP action work. I just think I don't say enough about my co-hosts, about all the work that they do behind the scenes and in the community. So I like to say thank you, because not enough people do stuff, and then when they're doing stuff, we should acknowledge them. So I'd like to say thank you to both of them. And welcome to You Be the Judge.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Dyer. It is such a pleasure. I am so excited to talk about the topic we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I would like to talk about what I did 2 weekends ago. It was it wasn't really sad. It was kind of sad because our oldest one moved to Harlem, getting away from his mommy. Well, his dad is really wonderful. But anyway, what I really liked about it, though, is I was able to walk on the street that's a block away from him, where they have a marker that depicted Tito Puentes and some of what his accomplishments were, and Adam Clayton Powell, as well as, who was the other one? Langston Hughes. And then it just showed me that I was walking where great people have walked before. I was like, oh my gosh, Malcolm X walked these blocks, James Baldwin's, Zora Neale Hurston. It was amazing that, just to think about some of the people who walked down these blocks. Harlem was just moving and bustling, and I had so much fun. It just filled me up with lots and lots of energy, which was really, really good, because I was not feeling that happy to leave without our oldest one there. It's hard to separate from them. I know that they have to leave you in order to be independent and all, and that's what you bring your children up to be, for them to actually be independent and live without you. But still, you on the one hand say, yes, but I want you to do that logically, but emotionally, no. But like I said, being in such a wonderful place made it easier. What about you, Judge Barber? What have you been up to?
Well, I've been keeping my eye on the Anne Arundel County election results, because that's been a nail biter particularly for the county executive race, and there were some other races that flipped, and it kind of goes back to that discussion that we had last week, that the mail-in ballots are really the ones that are bringing people over the top. And it shows that people who exercise their right to vote by mailing in their ballots, it's a big deal. And it is making a big difference in the numbers. And so never underestimate your vote and think it doesn't matter, or your vote doesn't matter. It's just not the case. Every voter's vote is being counted, and it's being done apparently very meticulously, because everybody's watching. I mean, if a voting machine breaks down, we know about it. And people, of course, they're going to go, well, then you start that count all over again. So, let's make sure that wherever it stopped, we know that those votes were counted and instead of not counted. So, votes matter. I was disturbed, and I was disturbed by the killing in the UVA case. That just kind of unraveled me a little bit, because I don't know the motive, and we get bits and pieces of information, and that has disturbed me greatly. The third thing that has interested me was a story that I just received in a county called Berkeley County in South Carolina, in a town in South Carolina. And it involves the fourth largest school district. And what they did is no different than what you saw Trump do with the Supreme Court. When you create a supermajority on your board, on your courts, and things of that nature, that's a very powerful move. And after they created this supermajority, they fired the superintendent. And then they started implementing all of these radical policies, book banning, and they took it and they couldn't care less if their NAACP branch, testified against it. They had the supermajority, so they don't care. But the move was dramatic, and they came in there like a whirlwind, and they upset the apple cart. But they let everyone know. They put everybody on notice as to what their agenda is, and what it ultimately does is it tears the system up, because teachers are going to walk out. They're going to walk away. And that's really what they want, because they bring in more of their people and that think like them. And so you have a very bad situation where, this is something that if supported by tax dollars, it's a travesty of justice. So, that's been on my mind. I couldn't believe my eyes when I was reading the story. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is just something out of the Jim Crow terrorism era. I just was unfloored. I was just unsettled by what I was reading in Berkeley County in South Carolina, what was happening on that school board, how they're called Moms of Liberty. They're creating chapters all over the country, and they have the same agenda. Seize the board, overtake the board, and be very, and they're organized, and they are mission driven, and they feel like they have the power to overtake government in this manner. So be on the guard for moves like that.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing that you talked about in reference to the mail-in ballots, that is so true. Because you remember last week I was saying that, a Republican has won our congressional race. But with the mail-in ballots continue to come in and continuing to come in and being counted, it turned out that no, that seat was actually kept by the incumbent. So you're right about that. And in reference to the shooting at UVA, that is, those are always such tragedies. I don't understand. And I don't think, that there is a way to understand what is happening. And yeah, I hope that we get to learn more and hope to stop tragedies like that, maybe. Oh my gosh. Well, and in terms of in terms of the third matter, I'm sorry, Dr. Dyer, in terms of the third matter, I really hope that we are paying attention and we are learning, because it's not about just voting and then wait until the next voting period. It's also keeping an eye on, the elected officials to make sure that they're doing what we elected them to do. Because I keep saying again that we are their employer. We pay their salaries. And so we should be telling them what to do instead of them telling us what to do. Dr. Dyer?
Well, I love this show. I love what we talk about, love what we do. Because if we pay attention, and that's really, let's put this under a big umbrella. Are we paying attention? And I think the problem is, and I know the problem is not because people don't care. People don't have the time to pay attention. And it's because they have to pay the bill. The economy is in the tanks. I understand all that. We have kids leaving us, right? We have things happening in our lives. So when and who can pay attention for me? I think that's sometimes where we get that question. Who is paying attention on my behalf? And as far as the Black community, we don't have that information where we can go to and say, this is happening, and I did not know, now I know, and now I can do something. Because I'm driving, right now I'm driving. I'm in an hour traffic coming from DC because, so where do I get my information from? Where do I get my news? If I flip through any channel, none of these channels speak to me and what I care about. So the Moms of Liberty, they're in Anne Arundel County too, right? They talked to the new superintendent. They gave him I talked to him offline. They kind of gave him a once and twice and three times overlook and smiled in his face. But we know they are heavily funded. Judge Collier Barber, you're right. They are they're not just organized, they're well funded. And they're well funded because they're holding these informational parties where white like people are backing them who are in the business sector, who are in tech sector, and who have influence in our government and our schools. So where do we join together so we can not just, because we're always seem like we're combating something, but we're not able to be proactive because we haven't joined together. We have all these organizations that are doing all these splintered stuff, but we're not powerful enough to pull together to stop something unless it gets out of hand. And I think that's where a fault is that we're at. And as far as, I just became campaign manager of a young lady who's going to be running for District 6 in Baltimore. And there's 320,000 people in that district. And this last gubernatorial election, 27,000 people voted. 27,000 people out of 320-something thousand. 27, here are the numbers, 27,265. I know the exact number. When I read it, I put my hand on my head and I stood up, put my hand on my hips and said, what the WF? Really? Are you kidding me? But we're going with the show because I'm standing on a soapbox in my car. So,
well, sometimes it's difficult not to get passionate about it when less than 10% of people are voting in a community. And also, it's a community like that, I would argue, that needs to have people vote the most because they're the ones who are most affected by government policies and certain people representing them. But then we keep...
I really think that people, if they are disenchanted with policy, if they're disenchanted with the system, they are the ones that need to take a more forward push and become Fannie Lou Hamers. You got to run for office. If you don't like the system, then you need to run for office and change the system instead of not vote. Don't sit back and not vote.
Not voting is a vote.
Then we have Judge Collier Barber, we have issues in Georgia where if you guys want to look up SR 22, SR 22 is, even though we're having this runoff, but the way that people cannot vote in Georgia is that they can't vote on the weekend after a holiday. They can't vote on certain nuances of where they can vote and how they can vote. But the Democrats never saw all this put into the paperwork and it was passed. And now you have tons of people that are probably not going to be able to vote for this runoff. So again, who's looking out for us if it's not the people that's supposed to be looking out for us, or are they doing it on purpose because they don't want us in office? It kind of gets kind of convoluted and it kind of can seem like this conspiracy theory. But really, how does SR 22 ever get passed when it disenfranchises the less economically poor people?
Here's my theory
so
on how
we would
that
love
happened.
to talk about that, and I know we love to talk about, the politics of going back and forth, and we have some very, very good and valid points that are being made, but we do have our guest here.
Yay!
Should we say?
Okay.
Yes.
We were just
Can I
talking.
just say one thing, though, Marilyn?
Oh, yes, Principal Holmes.
I just think it's so important that people understand that when they don't vote, they lose their own identity, their own personality. And people don't understand that even when you go to look for a job, they don't know what party you voted for, but they sure know whether you voted or not. The people, employers can check to see if you are a constituent that votes. They don't know what you voted for, but they know you vote. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand that is part of your identity. And we have to do a better job at helping Black folks understand that.
That's true. Well, you have to be careful also about the messaging because, see, the reason why you have legislation that comes out the way it does is because, people are going around doing clever messaging. They're not telling you the whole story. Mm-hmm, just like, Dan Cox is not going, he deleted things from his social media pages that he had before he won the nomination. That they're not going to come across as crazies. So they their messaging is very, very different.
But one thing they don't understand is that you, me, all of us are looked at in terms of who you associate with. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that when you associate yourself with a crazy man like Donald Trump, they think you just as crazy as he is. Mm-hmm. And people they need to understand that.
Yeah, we shake our heads and go, I don't understand that. No.
That's right.
I don't understand you. No. I mean, I'm thinking the same thing in the same way.
Exactly.
But the messaging part is so critically important because they have a lot of dog whistle and terms that they don't really tell you the full blown story. So instead of saying I'm anti-CRT or even raise the critical race theory in the campaign, they will start with a mild statement and say parents have get the right to say. That's all. That's all you know. And that sounds kind of innocuous. That sounds very innocent. But that's not the message behind that. Mm-hmm. It's a dog whistle term, which really, means that you're into book banning.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have to let Marilyn go with her agenda.
With our guest, who has been extremely patient. We were supposed to have Dr. Marcia Coleman-Adebayo with us, and she could not be, but she sent us a fabulous person. She's not even a substitute. She's just an excellent person. I think you might be the most famous person. Okay, no. I'm sorry. You might be the second most famous person we've ever had because we've had Wilch Brown and Merlene. They're a team, so we count them as one, as our guests. And their show is every week, but your show is once a month on WPFW. Am I right, Miss Young?
You are correct. We are on the fourth Wednesday of the month.
Yeah, and it's a fabulous show. It's called What's at Stake, and it is on the fourth Wednesday at 9 a.m. on WPFW, which is 89.3. Well, I'm a regular listener. That's why I had to pull back. I'm like, when do I listen to it in? Because I'm like, so there's still time to listen to it this month. And I've never been disappointed. I mean, it's always so interesting, so current, so up to date. So much information. So I know you wanted to get into this conversation, and you were very good at explaining yourself. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we could get into the topic of the Moses Macedonia Seminary when you get around.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll keep it brief. I'm Denise Young. I am a writer. I am a radio show host. Community activist. I'm a member of Racial Justice Now. Also, I'm a member of the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. And as of Election Tuesday, I just launched with a handful of Black journalists a new online newspaper called Black Republic Media.
Oh, wow.
Tell us about, well, since you mentioned it, tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, very simply, and it's interesting to hear, Dr. Dyer talk about news outlets not really serving us, not really giving us what we need or paying attention to what's of interest to us. And so a handful of journalists, Black journalists, came together and said, we have to do that. We have to step in and fill that gap. And more importantly, we have to be the ones to tell our stories, because when they're told inaccurately. They are told from the perspective of the dominant culture. And it's really important that we reclaim our stories. And in addition to that, we have to be very clear about what's happening to Black people in this country. There's a lot of suffering that is happening, and it's going ignored. It's not being acknowledged. We often do not have safe spaces to speak on it. And unless we tell these stories, unless we highlight that our existence in this country continues to be that which serves what we call the white settler project, we as Black folks are not going to, we're just not going to get out of this colonial state. And we have to be really honest about that.
Quite interesting. And that is so true. I know that we've been taught that there are 3 branches of government. I actually have argued that there are actually 4 branches of government. You've got the executive, the legislative, the judiciary, and then the press. Because the press actually decides who we pay attention to, and they decide how we view that person. Yes. And depending on which tone that they take, it really makes a difference whether that person is going to be able to go forward or not. So absolutely. I definitely agree with what you have to say. They sometimes ignore things that we should know about because they don't find it important or because they're trying to cover it.
I just want to briefly say a lot about what you just said, and that's the reason why actually we have a statewide equity committee, equity and media committee that formed with the Honorable Carl Snowden, because it's a critical issue. And as soon as I learned about it, the president of the NAACP, not the national, but our branch, she immediately summoned me and brought it to my attention that I should be a part of this. Another story that bothered me greatly this week was some newsbreak story on the chief of staff of Mayor Brandon Scott. And the fact that her resume was removed from LinkedIn and blah, blah, blah. So I was turned off by that. That's not a story. Okay. What are you trying to do? Tear somebody down? Because it's basically done to smear someone as opposed to have a valuable story. Now, you didn't go that direction with Roy McGrath, who's been indicted. The Capital Gazette did not print story after story after story on the front page above the fold with Roy McGrath at all. And the same thing about a lot of the events that we're hearing now about these agencies that have these audits being done. And the legislature is involved. And look at this outcome over here and this leadership. None of those stories have Larry Hogan's face, mugshot above the fold on the front page of the Capital Gazette or any of these stories. And I'm watching all that. I'm very attuned to that because it is a very sloppy piece of journalism. It's just feeding people what you want them to see, as opposed to reporting journalism in a fair and accurate way. Now, by the time I finished that story about Mayor Brandon Scott's chief of staff, I was highly appalled by that. And there was no takeaway from that at all, other than you just want to tear down somebody. Yeah, she made an honest living in the Obama administration or whatever administration. So what? What's the big deal about that? So she removed her LinkedIn profile. So what? You're trying to build a nothing off of nothing. What's criminal about that? She made a contribution to his campaign. So what? People do that.
Yeah.
So I don't get the nagging way in which they try to tear down people. I've just read so much junk on the comment section of many of these publications trying to tear down the governor-elect before he even gets into office. I give him so many years before he's indicted. Just terrible tear down messages that we have to be conscientious about, and we have to also be on the defensive and build that person back up, and not take all of those tear down messages that you see in the comment section of a lot of news articles today. We shouldn't just, let that sit and because the way it looks is they want you to get the impression that everybody thinks the way they do. Everybody thinks that, the governor-elect is this or that, and I just, and the majority of them that are writing these tear down messages don't say squat about Trump. Don't say squat about all the lies and all the fact checks, that all the erroneous information, all the stolen documents, all the filing of bankruptcy. They don't talk about that at all. They're silent. So
that's true, and it is interesting what they cover, because one of the things that I always wish that they would cover more is the topic that we are here to talk about for now, which is the Moses Macedonia African Cemetery matter.
Right. Yes.
So, Ms. Young, can you update us? Because we've heard about that before from Dr. Coleman Adebayo.
Yes.
And and, well, maybe not just update us, but give us a brief overview for the people who weren't there when we talked about it, and then update us.
Okay, so I'll do my best, because it's I am still learning so much about Macedonia Moses Cemetery, and it's really fascinating. It is it's an incredible piece of history. It is something that is ongoing. And as we like to point out, one of Robert Stubblefield, who we often refer to as our in-house historian, it begs the question of what happened to the communities that were associated with the cemetery. So very briefly, Moses Cemetery is an African cemetery that was first built or became a burial ground, was actually used, and I don't say this disrespectfully, used as a dumping ground for African slaves. And through the research that the BACC team has done, they have determined that many of those were children, particularly little girls. So what we know about what was happening in Montgomery County and also Virginia at that time is that the two states, very much, we always consider Virginia the South. And we often forget that Maryland, in fact, is the South. And it was very much a slave state. And so you have these two states almost acting as sort of the mother and father relationship to slavery. And so because of the land here, or the crops that they attempted, which was tobacco primarily, which was not very profitable because of how much it requires of the soil and the harvest time. So the crop, again, I don't say this irreverently at all, but very matter-of-factly. The primary crop for Virginia and for Maryland were African people. They were breeding Africans and they were sending them. They were the primary breeders for and suppliers for the lower southern states. Because remember, we at some point, I'm gonna not remember the date exactly. I think it's 1809, maybe something like that, where we are now no longer. There's a ban on the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, where we are no longer importing Africans. And what I find very interesting about that is that when you hear that in history as part of the lesson, there's never a follow-up. I don't know. I mean, I got some time on me and I've been in a few classes and I have never had a follow-up conversation that said, well, there was a reason why they stopped the transatlantic slave trade. And it wasn't because of benevolence. It was because they had made a business out of it right here. So through the research that BACC has done, they've determined that original cemetery was actually swampland. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to cultivate things the way that Africans did. So they were using it as a dumping ground. And just so, and just to mention this, part of the research that the BACC team did was looked at slave schedules in Montgomery County and the primary families that were slave owners and had what BACC refers to as death camps. And their slave schedules had a lot of children. So there will be the gender and the age of their property. So that's the origin of the cemetery. Post emancipation, you have a thriving community referred to as the River Road community that I believe it was Charlotte Gray who was the first to buy property in that area, which is that River Road, Wisconsin, near Wisconsin, Bethesda region. So they buy this land. Other Black people buy land and they create a thriving community. And this community is associated not only with the church, that it's Macedonia is their church, but the cemetery is also now the cemetery that holds the remains of not just members from the River Road community, but other neighboring Black communities that were developed post-emancipation. So fast forward, by the mid-1950s, the River Road community is beginning to be disintegrated. Disintegrated because you have a very active Klan, you have county government, you have corporations like the Washington Sanitation Company who wants the land. And so they, through various methods, everything from tax liens to, tricking them to sign over documents, for their property, to sheer terror, they get rid of the entire River Road community. And we know that that is not unique to Bethesda. We know that that was happening because we're talking about a Jim Crow South, but also we're talking about a country that just had not reconciled Black people as having a space in this country that was not subservient. So we know that this was happening all over the country. But what happens to the cemetery? Well, the first thing that happens to it is that it is divided up. We know that there is a, for instance, on one parcel that was in the mid 60s, they built a apartment building on part of it. There's a parking lot on another parcel. On another parcel, there is another apartment building. So all of these things were happening. So by the time there's a remaining parcel, and this was 6 years ago, so this brings us to current day. So about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago now, the county government had a town hall meeting. And it just so happens that Marsha Adebayo was there, and Harvey Matthews was there at this town hall meeting. And so the county council and its parks and planning, representatives from parks and plannings and HOC. And so they're saying to them, we're having this town hall meeting because, there's this land and, we have, it's in our plans to do X, Y, Z with it. But there's rumors that it was a cemetery. And so we just want to, allay any concerns you have, et cetera, except that they were lying. They knew it was a cemetery. And thankfully, so did Harvey Matthews, who stood up and said, there was a cemetery there. I know because my family owned land in the River Road community. My family had a farm, and I used to play in that cemetery as a child. And so that really was the impetus for the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, is to say, well, wait a minute, this belongs to us. Our bodies, are not for sale. Whether we are alive or whether we have, transitioned to the next realm, our bodies are not for sale. And so it has been a long battle for BACC. As you know, Marilyn, in October, we had a second hearing at the appellate court. BACC was, I don't know the proper term for it, so you'll have to help me out. But the decision in the lower court was that, in fact, the county did not have cause or it was not a legal transaction, the selling of the land to the developers for them to desecrate. And the part that I haven't said, and excuse me in my storytelling, but the land, one of the remaining parcels was sold to developers by HOC, and it was an illegal sale, and because they did not involve the community in that decision. So essentially ignoring the fact that there were a descendant community that needed to be involved. So we are... And
I want to stop you there for just 1 second, sure, because that was a huge victory. I mean, that was a huge victory. You have property that is worth a mint. This is, let's be clearer about where this property is located. It is located off of Wisconsin Avenue. It is located off of River Road. Which is one of, and it's right by the District of Columbia, Maryland line. It is prime location.
Yes.
It's really, really expensive property. I mean, for you to own property in that area, you have to have like megabucks.
You do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's a thriving. Yeah, it's a thriving. I mean, and that's why they stole that land. That to steal. I mean, just to rob these Black families. And we think that I think the number is like 262 families of their homes. And again, it's such a thriving community. And one of the things that, Harvey Matthews talks about, again, who he grew up in the River Road community, is that, it was the kind of community where, you had some people who had a little less and you had families who had a little bit more, but no one went without because they relied on each other. So in Harvey Matthews' case, his grandparents owned a farm. They had horses and other livestock. This is what his grandparents owned. And so the very land that his family owned now serves as the land that the Whole Foods is sitting on.
And so you can be sure that they were not given a fair market value for the property that they have. And so all of that generational wealth that is now lost is being
lost. Yes.
Lost to the current generation as well. So all of it just builds up on itself. I remember discussing earlier, a couple of months ago, back when we were talking about the National Book Festival. There is this author who wrote a book. The name is escaping me right now, but it's about George Floyd and how his how George Floyd's great-grandfather at one time was, I think, among the 1% in North Carolina, and how if he were able to keep that property, if he were not cheated out of that property, he would have been, George Floyd would have been so rich in this day and age that him passing what allegedly was a counterfeit $20 bill would have been ludicrous. And so that's what happens when generations' wealth are stolen over like that. And just to lay off just a little
bit. The property that the BACC is worth is $10 million, what we come up with.
No, I would say it's worth more than that.
I would think it's worth more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I would absolutely think it's worth more than that. And the story of, sort of this idea of stealing, our generational wealth, just in terms of farmland, I think the figure is Black farmers have been cheated out of something like 51 million acres of land. Dr. William Barber spoke about that, and he spoke about that particularly when he visited with BACC. And he, I don't think I'm misquoting him, but I believe he said that half of that has been stolen, just in the 20th century alone. So this is an ongoing story, and and not to take the focus at all off the specific topic of BACC, but the bigger conversation is we are in this country and we are being told that we have to work our fingers to the bones just to get scraps. And we're looked upon like something is inherently wrong with us. And it is the most twisted, altered way of existing. Like it absolutely, if you wrote the worst horror story, I'm still not sure that you could capture what the existence is for us, in those pages. And it's,
and then we're being, that's written for us, and then we're being told that it's our fault. That we are where we are and we continue to be where we're at. And the prognosis is even worse. I was at a women in NAACP meeting a couple of weeks ago, and which is WIN is what it stands for. And we were told that Black women in Montgomery County have assets of $120 on average.
In Montgomery County?
In Montgomery County, Maryland, the richest county in the richest state in the richest country in all of history, have assets valued $120. And I was horrified. I was completely horrified. And then what they said afterwards just took the wind out of me. And what they said afterwards was that we're worth $120 now. But in the future, it's projected that the value is actually going to go down to zero, if not negative, if not in the negative range. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. So that's why it's important to talk about generational wealth. And that's why these things have happened in the past and they continue to happen. I mean, we could just talk about what Wells Fargo did in Prince George's County, and continues to do, and what other organizations and agencies and, private corporations have done and continue to do. So this is not a problem of the past. This is a problem that keeps continuing.
Absolutely.
And that's why they don't want to teach us our history.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How many Black people still go to the bank at Wells Fargo? I don't.
I don't.
I thought it was insidious that, I mentioned Wells Fargo, but they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones. I deal with
Bank of America,
things of that sort for people sometimes, and I'm like, why are you here? It's like I've got my business accounts in M&T, and that's not to say that they're the greatest or anything else, but we've got to learn to deal with credit unions where we could get back some of the money that we're putting in there, as opposed to having that profit be made and given to someone else that doesn't have our best interest in mind. I mean, just things like that, just to, but not to get too far away. The reason why I mentioned Wells Fargo is because I saw what they did and how they tried to come back with it. So in Prince George's County, for instance, they had all these loans where people who actually paid off their homes were in danger. Have actually had their homes taken away from them through no fault of their own. And then what did they do? They had some stuffed animals at the courthouse for the kids to play with, to soothe them. Because coming to court is a very difficult thing for adults, let alone children. And I said, that's what happens. You take the children's home away from them, and then you give them some stuffed animals. That was the payback. But anyway, that's something that I'm
right. And we were supposed to be happy about that.
Yes, we were. Yes, we were.
I wanted to say, as a side note, you said Whole Foods is on part of that land now. Mm-hmm. Whole Foods, the CEO is a Trump supporter, so I have taken Whole Foods off my list. I do not shop there anymore.
I love it. And we have to be, it's hard, to make these decisions. And it's not because we don't want to make these decisions. It's because of, what's available to us. But when we can make these kinds of decisions, we absolutely should. And it's not always going to be convenient. I remember, many years ago, a couple set out to do a study and they were trying to buy only black for a whole year. And they were having to, go everywhere outside of the country to, get subscriptions to this, mail order this. It was not easy for them to do. And so I'm not suggesting that we go to those, to that level. But what I am saying is that where we can, we have to be like, that's a sign of protest. That is protest. And at every level, at every entry point of protests, we need to be doing it, because something has to give, right? Something has to give, because what we're experiencing now is not going to get any better unless there is a push, unless there is a real commitment to, and we've seen it. So it's not old, because I don't know if you got to Maryland or others got to hear on WPFW when Marsha and I were very fortunate to interview to Chairman Omali Yeshitela. There, Black radical thought is very much alive, and that's what they're doing in Florida and Missouri. So it's very much alive. And so, and I'm not suggesting that, people, well, maybe I am at this point. I am suggesting that we have to, it's not convenient. The struggle is not convenient, but it's so necessary. And we have the blueprint. We have so many blueprints. And
I wish we had the courage as well, because one of the things that I would really, really like to do, and Zanita, I love what you're doing. This is something I myself try to do. I try, because I work really hard for my money. So I try not to make people who don't have my best interest in mind richer off of my hard-earned money.
Yes.
As well. But doing it individually is just, it's not just, it is ineffective. But I still do what I can. I would love it if we could just set aside one day and say, this day, we are not going to buy anything from anybody. If we were to do it en masse like that, I think we would make such a great impact that we would get the attention that we need to change things.
Because let's see, Gandhi did it, right? When in his home country, when he told the Indians to stop working, right? And the British white was like, and they shut the whole country down. If you look around you, everything we do, whether it be from delivering mail to picking up trash to everything, if we just stopped, that's our power. This country would shut down. I mean, there's not a place you go where we're like, if everyone in this hotel, this restaurant, this service industry, from here to there, just stopped, they would be like, okay, we have a problem. Let's listen. And going back to where your son is now, I got my radicalization in Harlem. I was that black boy running around Harlem, saying what we ought to do. I'm a Marcus Garveyan. I would always say, that's where my heart lies, is that we can stop this, but it's got to be a we. It can't be just a few. And I think as long as they keep pitting us against each other by party lines, right? Not realistic lines, but party lines, and this party and that party, then that's where we get all confused and mystified.
Yeah, and when
Denise,
people are here, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask a quick question that relates to some of the remarks you all have made of Denise. Denise, does the movement with regard to the cemetery and the legal actions, is there part of the action does it include making the case that resolving the status of the cemetery and honoring the legacy of those who are buried there, that it provides universal benefits? It's not just for Black people or people of African descent. I think that resolving this issue giving it its historical significance and teaching it in the schools redounds to the benefit of all people in the state of Maryland and in this county. And also addressing these other various issues that folks have touched on. It reminds me, there's an economist who was with the Citigroup who said that racism over a period of time, she had a specific period of time, it cost the United States $16 trillion. And that hurts all of us, regardless of party, regardless of race, regardless of geographic location. Whatever African Americans and people of African descent have done in pursuit of justice has redounded to the benefit of everyone. And so all of this to say, how do we communicate that message to our communities that addressing this very specific issue is symbolic of addressing issues that will help all of us?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question. So let me just say,
because she's smart. She's super smart, and that was just a smart question.
Yeah. No. So that's an excellent question. So in terms of what we're looking at in terms of where we are, is we're waiting for the decision, and so what we don't know which way the decision is going to go. What we as an organization have been saying is that we want the land back. And what we want to do with the land is to build a museum on the land that both honors our ancestors, but absolutely is an educational tool. Because a big part of what we see happening nationwide and what we have seen happen, century after century after century, is that there really is a resistance to, and by white people, to really meet face to face what the history is of this country. We can, there are so many ways that it can be twisted, and somehow it can be the finger can be pointed back to us. There's something wrong with us, or that was so long ago, or, I didn't do it, whatever the case may be. And, today you didn't do it, but you're benefiting from it. And the more you benefit from it, the less incentive you have on a very personal basis to want anything to change. And so being able to have those kinds of honest conversations are really important. So BACC recognizes that. And so BACC really wants to use that land to spotlight, these historical, undertones that really need to come to the forefront so that people understand. Listen, this county that is nicknamed the Free State, it had some really ugly stuff happening, some really, really dark things happening, right? And so to be able to do that, the other thing that, related to your question is that BACC is in deep conversations with Montgomery County Public Schools to develop curriculum around Moses Cemetery. And so we're, BACC is really excited about that. In addition, there is, I believe it's Washington Episcopal School. We are in conversations with them about developing a curriculum because, if I'm not mistaken, Washington Episcopal is sitting on some land. Yeah. So there, so being, it's not going to happen overnight, and that's okay. One school at a time, one area at a time. And I think, and when I say it's not going to happen overnight, meaning what we are trying to affect BACC, but that doesn't mean that others somewhere aren't doing the same thing or aren't trying to affect the same kind of change, because they are. And this is, to your point, Marilyn, about how it's ineffective when only one of us is doing something or a few of us are doing something. I absolutely agree with you. But one of the things that our Black media, because I don't even consider mainstream, just is out of my vocabulary. It's just not in my lexicon. They don't work for me. They don't work for me. They work against me and our communities. But the one of the things that the Black media has to do is to bring these stories to the forefront where these things are happening, because it's easy for us to believe that we are working in isolation, and it feels that way because we don't know what's going on. But, one of the things that John Jeter, who is one of the journalists that's part of Black Republic Media, talks all the time, is that our journalists have become so lazy in the sense that we do not want to go into the communities. We do not want to talk to the people. We have forgotten our legacy of journalists like Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells had her shop burnt down. I believe it was twice, because she was saying, listen, hey, this is what's happening here. You can think that, these Black men are running up and down the South, raping white women, but that is not the case. And we know it's not the case. She was willing to go into the communities and talk about that, but also talk about what was happening to Black women, at the hands of these white men who were lynching Black men. So she was willing to do that. We forget that Malcolm X started out as a journalist, and he was, and I don't even remember, God forgive me, John is really gonna, Denise, forget the name of that first paper, but he was a journalist. He was taking it to the streets and taking it to the streets, but bringing it also from the streets. And so we as journalists, and I say that loosely for myself because I am not trained as a journalist. I am a writer, but a journalist, that's a whole different discipline that I am learning about, and I have the utmost respect for. But we have to be able to take it to the streets, and we have to be able to go in the streets and bring it from the streets. So
we do have a heartbreak, and I want Denise, before we go, I want people where they can get the Black Republican, and get that information.
Woo!
And
Black Republic, you would get right scared off. You would get ready to scare off all potential supporters. Black Republic Media.
Black Republic Media.com.
Yes.
But we're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. You be the judge of 6 to 7. You can also hear all of our shows on iHeart, Apple Tune, all the week, and all your podcast channels. Just put in You Be the Judge, and it'll pop on up. So please get that information where they can read and hear and see you.
Absolutely. Again, you can reach us at blackrepublicmedia.com. We have our second, this is our second week. The first week was election week, and our second article dropped today. So we are really excited, and we're going to be moving. We're going to be doing this. So please tune in.
Well, we really, really enjoyed having you, and thank you so much for updating us on the Moses Macedonia African Cemetery Coalition. That's been really helpful.
Thank you.
When the decision comes in, if you could come back, that would be great. And if you want to talk with us about an article that you're working with and you think that we just should know about it, please join us again. We would be really happy to have you. And you could tell people where they could listen to you on WPFW again.
Yes, WPFW on the fourth Wednesday at 9 a.m. Absolutely. Join us.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. And thank you, everyone. Oh, you're welcome. And thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you next week. And since we had so much to talk about this week, next week we won't be having a guest, so that way we could talk. So it seems like people had a lot of things to say, and I didn't mean to cut anybody short. It's just that we have a guest, and she has given her time to be here, and we wanted to respect her time. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You.
Bye.
Wonderful to meet everybody.